Welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll know when new videos are available. I really hope you enjoy this one. All right. So here we are continuing on with the RPA. Last week, I believe we finished up at the assignment request portion of the RPA. So it'll be paragraph 3K of the California Residential Purchase Agreement. So we're going to move on looking at the contingency periods today. We're going to continue with that and see how far we can get in today's class. And I'm going to go ahead and share so that you guys can see the contract. All right, so what you should be looking at right now is the RPA, and we're looking at paragraph 3L, which is the contingencies. What we're going to look at is the time to remove those contingencies. We're going to talk about the right way to fill them out. And I'm happy that we're talking about this because I actually talked to somebody this week about the appraisal contingency and how the appraisals work and having people, you know, write offers over asking price and things like that. So I'm glad we're going to talk about it today. So, all right, the first one that we're going to look at right there is 3L1, which is the loan contingency period. Now, the default is 17 days. If I am a listing agent and I am looking at offers, I'm getting at offers, looking at offers, I really don't have a problem with the 17-day loan contingency period unless my buyer, the buyer that's writing the offer, has lowered the escrow period, right? So like we get those offers that are 21-day escrows, things like that, and then they still leave a 17-day loan contingency or appraisal contingency or investigation, and we'll talk about all of those. That doesn't work for me. We have a 21-day escrow, so you're going to have contingencies up until 4 days prior to our scheduled close of escrow date, and I don't like that. So I will shorten them in that point, at that point, especially the loan, right? The appraisal, I'm probably on every one of my escrows. If I'm a listing agent, I'm probably going to ask for shorter periods on the appraisal. Just because I want to get that out of the way as fast as possible. And I also want to put a little bit of pressure on the buyers, but still give them opportunity to do the things they need to do. So let's look at the loan for example. So in the loan contingency, I have 17 days, right, to remove my loan contingency, 17 days after acceptance. Now, what that means is it doesn't mean that I have 17 days to get full loan approval. It means I have 17 days, whether I get full loan approval, I get a conditional approval, or whatever the case is, I have 17 days to figure out if I feel comfortable and confident enough to remove that contingency and move forward with my offer and in this transaction. And for us as agents, as buyer's agents, we have to understand that that's how it works. Now, one thing is for sure, if you're going to rely on your lender to tell you, yeah, it's okay to remove the contingencies, probably not going to happen. Most lenders will not agree to take responsibility for you saying, I'm removing my contingency, okay? So think about where you're at, right? So if you have a conditional approval, and by 17 days, that's what most of us would be a conditional approval. And that means that these are the conditions that are required either pre-doc or pre-funding, right, before you close. There's two sets of conditions. So us understanding what those conditions are and that those conditions aren't crazy is going to help us to feel comfortable when it's time for us to ask our buyer to remove that contingency. Understanding that you're not going to get a full approval, and sometimes you may, but most of the time you're not. You have to understand that if you're not willing to remove that contingency on the date that it's supposed to be, on the 17 days, let's say, we'll stick to that. We have to be proactive as the buyer's agents. We have to look at it and say, okay, well, we still have this list of crazy conditions that are required, or the co-borrower is missing something, or whatever it is, it's things that are harder to control. As far as conditions go, we have to be proactive and say to the listing agent, hey, look, here's where we're at. These are the things that are an obstacle. It doesn't look like we won't be able to qualify, but we need information, and more time to collect that information. So I'm asking you for an extension. And you should know those things much sooner than on the day 17 that you need to request the extension. So it's us just being proactive, being involved in the transaction. We need to ask for extensions early. Now, if I wait until day 17 comes and goes, and then I start getting harassed by the listing agent, they haven't sent me a notice to perform yet, but I'm getting harassed by them. Hey, where's your loan contingency removal? What's going on with your contingencies? If that's happening, then it's much harder for me to negotiate an extension. Much, much harder. Okay? So we have to, as buyer's agents, it's not like the thing that really worries me when I'm having conversations with buyer's agents is they're like, well, it's our contingency removals today, but they haven't asked us for it yet. But that shouldn't be how we do business. And again, I know this is my opinion, and this is just the way I feel about us as buyer's agents, is that if I do the work as agent and I do everything that you've asked me to do, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, or Mr. Buyer, or Mrs. Buyer, and we've gotten to the point where we've gotten your approval, we've gotten your acceptance, we've gotten everything done, and it's just time for us to remove your contingencies, if there's nothing glaring that should stop me from removing your contingencies, it's time to do it. Because I've committed to you, you're committed to this property, and we have to show the seller that we're now committed by removing the contingencies that exist. We've got to start getting in that habit as buyer's agents, not the opposite habit, which most of you have, and maybe not everybody on here, but most agents in general, because of the conversations I have, their approach to the contingencies is I'm leaving them as long as possible because I don't want to lose my buyer's deposit. And I think that's not a great business plan for buyer's agents. Your business plan should be, I've done everything that's necessary. You've done everything that's necessary. Everything looks good. It's time to remove the contingencies and commit to closing this transaction. Don't give them loopholes, right? Don't give them loopholes. Don't give them the ability to have cold feet and walk away. But again, that's my opinion and my soapbox. So loans, 17 days, that's the time. If you can't do it, if you don't have the full approval and you can't get the extension, before you remove the contingency, you can cancel and you can get your deposit back, okay? Now, with things like loan, if you do qualify, for example, and this is one of the conversations I have quite often with agents is, well, we've removed all our other contingencies, but we still have loan. So we're good, we could cancel. And that's not necessarily the case. The loan contingency itself is very specific that you can only invoke the loan contingency to cancel if they don't qualify. If they don't qualify. Right? And so like in the example, we were saying we have a really long list of conditions, and there's like, we need extra taxes, or there's things that we have to get proof from and we can't get it to qualify. Well, that's fine. I can then at that point, if I can't comfortably remove that contingency on day 17, I can now send cancellation instructions. But what I can't do, hold on, Gio. What I can't do is I can't use it as a backstop. I can't just say, well, we have the loan contingency, let's remove everything else, and if we don't like stuff, we're going to cancel. That's not the ability. You don't have the ability to do that, okay? So the loan contingency itself is very specific. It is, they can't qualify, that's why you're using the loan contingency, period, end of story. Okay, if you try to use it as that backstop where I don't have any other contingencies, but I still have this one, even though the buyer does qualify, the property appraised, everything is right, we just we can't close yet, and I want to be able to get my deposit back, doesn't work like that. Okay, Gio, did you have a question, or was it just an accident that you were unmuted? I'm guessing accident because he hasn't said anything. All right, moving on. So loan, be very careful. Please, please, please don't sell the loan contingency as like this last line of defense, because that's not what it is. Okay, be very careful with that and understand. Darwin, go ahead. I don't know if you're waving or if you're raising your hand, but go ahead.
But let's say that I remove all my contingencies and this extra that I have. The appraisal, when it was done, the value didn't came at the price that they were asking, we offered. What would be in this case? Either the seller decides to move forward or we cancel and I get my deposit back.
If you've removed all your contingencies, yes, there's a very good chance that you're losing your deposit.
Okay.
Look, when it comes to the deposits with contingency periods, not everything is, it's not cut and dry. It's not black or white. Hey, you're losing your deposit. There's a lot of things that happen when it goes into it. But are you putting your deposit in jeopardy by removing your contingencies and then trying to cancel? Yes, 100%. Is it likely that you could lose your deposit? Yes, depending on how much the buyers and sellers want to fight over it. So just understand that that's the case. But if it's removed, whatever chances that you take to cancel, you are now putting your deposit at risk. Okay, so Giovanni first, and then Zuli. Go ahead, Gio.
Kyle, what's up, bro? Aren't you happy, bro? I made it,
Yeah.
dude. I made it, bro.
Let's see. I'm gonna keep an eye on you and see if you make it all the way through. Go ahead.
Bro, hey, so question. So if let's say we have the loan contingency still in place,
Mm-hmm.
but so let's say it's a seller selling their current property and purchasing, if they have the loan contingency on the purchase only, and then let's say the sale doesn't go through, technically they're using those funds to be able to fund the loan. Is that considered a loan issue?
Yeah. I mean, it could obviously because now they can't qualify for the loan because they don't have the money. So yeah, sure, that could, but that's only if the down leg cancels. Now, if the buyer cancels, right, because of whatever happens, that's out of the so we can frame this. The seller is selling their property and they're buying another property. So the buyer on the property that the seller is selling to become a buyer, if that buyer cancels, then yeah, sure, I could go back and say, okay, now I don't qualify because it was out of my control. The buyer canceled that deal, right? But if I'm the seller and I say, well, now I don't want to sell to you, well, that's a self inflicted wound. So that would be a harder argument to make saying, well, now I don't qualify for the loan. So I'm doing it. I'm like, wait a minute. No. You could have qualified, but you chose to cancel the deal to not get the money. Right? Do you see the difference?
Gotcha. Yeah,
Right. I
that
mean,
makes.
there's a difference in how that works because if it's out of your control, where the buyer, let's say the buyer removed all their contingencies and then still canceled, they breached the contract. Well, that's out of my control. I still wanted to close. I still wanted to work with, you know what I mean. I still want to do those things, and now I can't qualify. That's different than I got mad at the buyer, canceled on them, and now I don't qualify. And well, no, you did that to yourself. Right? It would be the same thing as if, like, your buyers, like for example, I'll give you a good example for the loan, and this has happened to lots of agents. Your buyer qualifies for loan. Everything's cool, right? Last minute, what do? They go and get credit to buy furniture for their new house before they close. Underwriter pulls their credit report, sees new credit, their score drops. Now they don't qualify. Guess what happens? Loan contingency doesn't protect you from that self-inflicted wound. Does that make sense? You guys follow that?
What? That's crazy.
Yeah, and that's happened to lots of people, right? So that would be the difference in that case, Giovanni. So great question. Go ahead, Zuli.
Good morning, Kyle. Good
Good
morning,
morning.
everyone. Last year in November, we were about to lose a $10,000 deposit. We removed all the contingencies. We signed loan docs. The buyer sent the remaining funds to close to escrow, and and all of a sudden the lender said, I'm not going to fund the loan because they run the credit again and they found an alternative social security number used by the borrower years ago.
Right.
So they denied the loan. They didn't give us the loan.
Mm-hmm.
So we were about to lose the deposit, but good thing we were working pretty well with the listing agent since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So he put us in contact with another one of his loan officers that closed the transaction.
Yeah.
But let's say if we couldn't find any other alternative financing option for the borrower,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way we can go after the lender? Because we review the credit report that they were saying that there was an alternative
Uh-huh.
um, social security, and the
Mm-hmm.
same information was in the first credit report.
Mm.
So they didn't see it in the beginning.
Yeah.
They noticed that at the end.
Yeah, I mean that would be not for us as agents, but civilly if a borrower had lost their deposit, and we've had cases like that where a buyer lost their deposit because of some of the actions of a lender, and they did attempt to sue the lender and us. So yeah, after the fact, the buyer may have that recourse. I mean, we don't. And my thing is this: I generally, when it comes to transactions like stuff with lenders or with any vendors that I work with or that we would work with, I would hesitate to say go sue them because it's going to fall back on you, right? But if the borrower was to choose and say, hey, wait a minute, we lost this money because of the actions of that person, and they chose to do it, they would probably have a right to do that.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's why
Yeah.
it's good to know, if your lender is willing to take the bullet, which is basically like, hey, the buyer's losing money. Can the lender cover some of the money he's lost?
Yeah, well, but unless they've made a mistake, they're really not required to do that. I mean, they're not. But if again, we talked about this last week. If I have a relationship with a lender where that lender knows that they're getting my business, then sometimes they're more likely to help you in those positions if there was a mistake. That's true. But I hope that helped, Zuli.
Thank you, Kyle. Of course.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's move on. Appraisal. So the appraisal contingency ultimately is one of the most confusing. I always have people are confused by the appraisal contingency, and I don't think it should be that confusing. So the appraisal contingency is based upon appraised value at a minimum of the purchase price. That's the default. Or if I check the box, a different value, right? It's not, I don't have to check the box to put the offer price in, okay? I don't have to put anything in that box. I don't have to do anything. With this section right here, I don't have to do a thing. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to check that box. If I'm wanting my appraisal contingency to be the offer price, that's already there. That's how I leave it alone, period. End of story. Now, if I am writing an offer over asking price, right? And I'm trying to portray to the listing agent that I am willing to pay the difference between appraised value and the price that I offered, which people like to put into their offers, right? But they don't change this appraisal section. They don't change it. They leave it as the offer price. Well, here's what happens. If, for example, I write an offer that says, okay, I'm writing you an offer at $750,000, but the house is listed at $700,000. And I have an appraisal contingency that says it is based off of at least the purchase price. But in my other terms, I write buyer willing to pay difference between appraised value and offer price, right? Which we've all seen, or some of us have done, we've written. But my appraisal contingency tells me that I have the right to cancel this transaction if it doesn't appraise for the offer price. Even if I wrote, I'll pay the difference. Doesn't matter. So what you have to do to enforce that is, if I'm really committed as buyer and buyer's agent to pay the difference between the appraised value, what I'm going to say is that I am confident that it's going to appraise for your list price. So what happens is, in this case, $750 sales price, $700 list price, sales price and list price, I'm going to say I want a loan contingency if it doesn't appraise for your list price, which means I know I'm offering you the $750. So anything between $700 and $750, I'll pay that difference. If it goes below the $700, which was your marketing price, then I get to use my appraisal contingency to back out. Does that make sense? And if I were a listing agent, I would be doing the same thing. My counter offer would be, great, you do have an appraisal contingency and you are committed to pay the difference, but I'm only confident in my list price. So I'm going to counter you that says appraisal contingency subject to an appraised value of $700,000 or more, right? So that says they're going to pay the difference between anything over $700,000. If it goes below 700, then that's my bad because I didn't price the property right. And if we have to renegotiate, we renegotiate, but it doesn't mean you have to pay the total difference between that and 750. Does that make sense to you guys? Anybody have questions? Huh.
So that's a good thing to input on the contract when you're not FHA, right? Because when you're FHA, you're covered through the FHA mandatory clause, right?
We're gonna get into the mandatory clause right now, which has an effect on the appraisal contingency. I'm gonna talk about that next. Okay, Darwin.
Let's say you didn't write down the appraisal price and you offer the asking price. That's it. The appraisal didn't came at value. What would be next? The seller decide to move forward or cancel?
The seller can't cancel on anything. The buyer has the right to decide to pay the difference or cancel if the seller won't renegotiate. It's always the buyer's choice. Like, for what you guys have to understand is that once a seller accepts an offer, they're committed. The only way they can get out is if they have a contingency, like purchasing a replacement property, or the buyer doesn't perform, right? So I send a notice to perform, buyer doesn't perform, then I can cancel. Otherwise, the seller has no right. So in Darwin's example, the offer is 700, the list price is 700, it appraises for 685. So it's $15,000 less than the list and offer price. And the seller goes, nope, I'm not lowering the price, I'm canceling. Seller doesn't have the right to cancel. The buyer has the right to cancel if the seller refuses to lower the price, because nothing says the seller has to reduce the price. Right? So if I listed it at 700, got an offer at 700 and appraised at 685, the seller has no obligation to lower the value. But the buyer has the right to cancel if they're not going to come up that $15,000. But the seller never has the right to cancel based on the appraisal, ever. Okay? Any other questions about the appraisal contingency itself? I'm going to talk about the FVAC here in a second, but any questions about the appraisal itself? Okay. All right. So let's look at what Giovanni mentioned is this section right here where it says removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate the appraisal cancellation rights in the FVAC. So let's look at, you know what? Let's bring that up right now so we can look at it. And we're going to add that to, and we're going to look at it right now. So here is the FHA VA amendatory clause. Okay. So what the VA FHA amendatory clause says is that this price that we put in this section right here, if the property doesn't appraise for that amount, then even if the buyer has no appraisal contingency, they cannot lose their deposit. Period. So, again, with those offers that are FHA where people are writing offers above asking price, where they're saying, I'm going to pay the difference. If they're putting the offer price, so in that original example I gave you, it was listed at 700, but they offered 750,000. So they write 750,000 here. But they say, we're committed to pay the difference between appraised value and offer price. Well, if the property doesn't appraise for the 750, even if it appraises for 749,900, right? It doesn't appraise for this amount. Even if they committed to pay the difference, or they had no appraisal contingency, or they've already removed the appraisal contingency, they get to cancel and they don't lose their deposit. So just like my counter saying, if I'm the listing agent where somebody wrote their offer over, where I countered and said, hey, your appraisal contingency is based on an appraised value of 700,000, right? In this case, I'm also going to include in my counteroffer a new FHA VA amendatory clause at a $700,000 value here instead of 750, so that as long as it appraises for my asking price, they're still committed. They don't have that protection any longer. I'm going to send this new form and mention it in my counter, have them sign and return it, and make sure escrow gets it. Now, when we don't do these, like we don't take the step, I've seen it a number of times where people don't include the FHA VA amendatory clause from the contract. Escrow has to include it because they know it's an FHA loan. So escrow will automatically do one on their own escrow amendment that's at the offer price. So you got to make sure that you do it this way. So this goes back to that amendatory clause. If you're doing that, this is the step you have to take as a listing agent if it's FHA and it's over asking price. Okay? That's what you got to do. You got to do a new one. Go ahead, Giovanni.
Question, bro. So if, let's say, because a lot of times, you know, us as agents, we're so good with contracts that we submit offers. Sometimes we forget to include that, but it's an actual FHA offer, but we don't actually include that. Does that give us any risk in escrow because we didn't include it?
Well, no, escrow is going to include it, but you can't say in one sentence we're so good with contracts and we forgot this form. So you got to restate that question, but it's not going to go if the escrow doesn't have one, they're going to do their own, and they're going to do their own based on the offer price they see, not how they're protecting the seller or not how they're protecting the buyer, just based on offer price alone. So, and gotcha. By the way, if you're writing a contract like everybody is on this, once you check the box on here on your financing that it's FHA, it's automatically including this form. So if you're missing it, it means you're not doing your job, period. Okay, so that's the appraisal contingency. Questions? Any other questions about appraisal contingency and how it's affected by FHA or VA loans? Anybody? No? All right. Moving on. 3L3. So this is paragraph 3L3. This is the investigation of property. This is the investigation of property. So investigation of property is just that. Going and doing your investigations, whatever investigations those are, whether it is your professional home inspection, going to the city to check for permits, having special inspection like soil tests or anything that you want to do as buyer to justify the condition of the property in your mind to move forward, you have 17 days to do it. Okay? That's it. 17 days, whatever you want to do. Now, I'm not talking about looking at the disclosures, none of that stuff, because that's its own section. 3L4 is review of seller's documents. That's also 17 days. Or 5 days after delivery, whichever's later. We'll get to that in a moment. But investigation of property is just that. That's your due diligence stuff. That's your inspections. That's your plumbers. That's whoever you want to send into the property. That's going to help you decide if the condition of the property is acceptable to you to move forward. You got 17 days to do it. Now, also what you have is 17 days informational access to the property. It says right here, 17 days after acceptance, buyer's right to access the property for informational purposes is not a contingency, does not create cancellation right, and applies even if the contingencies are removed. So what that says to you is, what you should know as a listing agent is this. If I get one of those offers that said, we're removing our inspection contingency and we're removing our appraisal contingency and here's this and we're all cash, all that stuff. If you don't counter their informational access for them to go in, they still have the right, and you cannot stop them for 17 days from entering the property, even if they've removed all their contingencies already, right? So if I counter like most of you do, and I shorten this to 7 or 10 days, but I don't address this, even if they remove their contingency in 7 days, this 17 days still exists. They still have the right to go into the property for the 17 days. Once 17 days passes, they have to ask your permission. If the seller doesn't want to allow them, they don't have to. Okay? Questions about these two? Anything? Yeah, go ahead, Giovanni. Well, okay.
This is Julie.
Okay, Zuli, go ahead.
Okay, so let's say I completed all my investigations, but I haven't received response from my request for repairs.
Mm-hmm.
Should I remove the inspection contingency even if I haven't received?
Yeah, there is nothing in the contract that requires a seller to respond to a request for repairs. So there's nothing that compels them to. So if you haven't heard from them and it's day 17 and they send you a notice to perform saying to remove that, but they still haven't responded to your request for repairs, you would still be required to remove your contingency because they're not required to respond. Should they? Yes, but they're not required to. So that it becomes a conversation with you and your buyer that says, okay, we're assuming now because they didn't respond to us that they're not doing any of these repairs. Do you want the property if they don't do the repairs? If the answer is yes, remove the contingency, move on. If the answer is no, then send cancellation instructions before you remove the contingency. That's the way you have to address it.
I see. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, Gio, you had your hand up again.
Yeah, and then regarding, so let's say we have 17 days, but I'm actually in escrow right now with a situation similar, basically like this. So the seller has an ex-wife that lives there, and we're having trouble getting access to the property. We only seen it during the showing time, and we're trying to get access again, but we're basically like 2 weeks from closing, and we wanted to see it again. Just to, because I know that it's been raining, so we kind of just wanted to see that if there's any leaks.
Yeah, you don't have the right to. You should have asked for extensions for those things. You should have done that in writing, but now you don't get to see it until you do the final walkthrough. They do the final walkthrough.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's 17 days, and then if we remove it, what if we never remove the inspection contingency? What happens then?
Doesn't matter. Your 17 days for access is gone. You just have a contingency to cancel.
Gotcha. And so if they don't basically want to give us access, then it's up to the buyer to make a
Yep.
decision whether they want to cancel or not, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's it. Charlie, go ahead. You had your hand
Hey
up,
Kyle,
Charlie.
good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I was curious, I know Marie had a situation with the 9A report. How do we know? Like, will escrow tell us or will the TCs tell us like when a 9A report is required?
Well, yeah, that doesn't, the 9A report is part of the investigations, but it's also part of the review of the seller's documents. So it's kind of a separate contingency. But yes, anything in the city of LA is going to require that 9A and the certificate of compliance. And then each individual city has a pre-sale inspection that's also part of those documents and your inspection period. So those are separate things. But yes, your TCs should be guiding you on that. But you guys also, as real estate professionals in the cities you work in, you need to know, are there city required repairs or not, or reports or not. Don't rely on somebody else to tell you it's required. You guys need to do your homework on the cities that you're working in. Okay, because your license is the one that's in, like Maria, Brisa, whatever, the other TC, whatever TC you hire outside, whoever you work with as your transaction coordinator. If they make a mistake on whether or not a report was supposed to be ordered or not, that's not their fault. It's yours. You're the one who's going to be held responsible. So if something happens where something wasn't done that was required to be done that could affect your license, it's your license that's going to be affected. So it's on you as agents to make sure that you know what cities require, whether it's a 9A or a pre-sale inspection. And Maria just put in the chat, it is in All Stars Connect. There's a list in the library for those of you guys that are watching this video that work for All Stars. In our intranet, we have a library that has those cities that require reports or inspections. So do your homework, guys. You need to do it. You're the professionals. Do the work. Okay. All right. So let's look at, so we looked at the informational access, the investigation properties. If I'm countering this to shorten it to 10 days and I have my appraisal at 10 days, then I'm going to make this 10 days that they have the access, right? Whatever matches my longest contingency, that's what this is going to be also. Right? So if I shorten everything to 10 days, then I got to shorten this informational access also to 10 days. So it matches. Okay. Review of seller's documents. Again, those should match with your investigation of the property because it's part of their due diligence, right? Is to review the disclosures. And what it says right here is it's 17 days after acceptance or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So what that means is this. Whatever my contingency period is, right? So let's say that you shorten it to 10 days, okay? If you don't deliver all of your documents to them within 5 days of acceptance, so there's that 5-day gap for their contingency, then you're adding 5 days to whatever delivery date you did for your disclosures. So let's say that there is a pre-sale inspection, there is, the NHD, the lead-based paint, the TDS, the SPQ, right? We go through all of those required disclosures that exist from the seller. And the pre-sale inspections like City of Southgate, 9A report, all that stuff, those are seller documents. Those are required documents for the seller to deliver to the buyer. In the contract says in the first 7 days. But if I change these contingency periods, it now affects my delivery dates of those documents, okay? So if I shorten those review of sellers documents, but I don't deliver my documents on time, then I'm giving them 5 days after. So for example, like the pre-sale inspections for City of Southgate, they take, 4 weeks to get the report back sometimes. You could pay to get expedited ones. But the majority of the time, I place the order. 2 weeks later, the guy comes out to do the inspection. 2 weeks later, I get the report, right? If that's the case, I'm already at my close of escrow date, right? By the time I get the report, which means technically as listing agent, I can't ask the buyer to remove their contingencies until 5 days after I give them that report, which puts us past our close of escrow date. You guys as listing agents have to understand how that stuff works, how it affects your escrows. All of that. So know that if you deliver anything late that's a seller required document, you're giving the buyer 5 more days before you could request them to remove their contingency of the review of seller's documents. Okay? Keep that in mind. You got to have everything ready. So if I'm you as listing agent, if I'm going to ask for buyers to shorten that period for them to review those documents, I'm delivering all of those documents with their counteroffer. Or once I get the accepted counteroffer back, the next email is going to be, here's all your disclosures. Get to work, right? I don't want to be the cause of them having more time. I don't want to give them a loophole to be able to walk away. So what that means is, if I am listing a property in the city of Southgate or Huntington Park or Maywood or the city of LA where I need a 9A and the certificate of compliance, guess when I'm doing all of that stuff? I'm starting it the minute I list the property. The minute I list the property, I'm getting all that stuff started so that I have a better chance of being compliant with my contract, because I don't, those reports are out of my control. When they're going to happen, what's going to be on them. And one of the nice thing is that cities that allow you to push the responsibility of the repairs off to the buyer, well, guess what I do? If I have the time to order that report, get that report back before I have an accepted offer, guess what I do? When I do my counters, I'm going to be like, here's the city pre-sale inspection report, buyer to take responsibility for our repairs, and I send it with my counteroffer. So if I have 4 people that I'm countering and I lose 3 of them because they don't want to do it, but one of them agrees, they've already seen it from the beginning. I don't have to wait and find out 10 or 15 or 30 days from now whether or not they're going to accept the repairs or not. So be proactive, guys. Think ahead. You know what's supposed to happen. Do the right things. And I'm going to tell you this, and this is on video. All of you can know. There is not a city. Well, I take that back. There's one city that lets you waive it. But you cannot waive city inspection reports. It is not legal. There is any of the cities that we work in do not let you waive the inspection itself. The inspection has to get done. Now, you have waivers where buyers can take responsibility for those clearances, but those inspections have to get done. Period. End of story. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Okay. Matthew, go ahead.
Hi there, Kyle. How's it going? Since we're on recur request, I have a question regarding that. So,
okay,
let's say, for example, property's closed already, closed like less than a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
I got repair request within the transaction. However, my buyers, after getting some work done on the property, found that some of the repairs made when the seller was renovating the property weren't completed correctly.
Mm-hmm.
How do I go about getting in contact with, because I've tried to get in contact with the listing agent and I had no success. How do I go about trying to get these repairs sort of made?
Keep trying with the listing agent. If the listing agent is responding, go to the broker. If the broker doesn't respond, you're going to have to try to find a way to get to the seller. But right now, this is a civil issue between the buyers and the sellers, to be honest. So if they didn't do something they were supposed to do and there's some damages that they're trying to collect, it's a civil issue between the buyers and the sellers.
What's the time limit from the
2 years? 2 years from discovery of the issue. So if it's like a non-disclosed item or something that they didn't repair properly, they have 2 years from the discovery of that issue to take action, right? So they found this now, they could file a suit 2 years from now. Don't wait that long, but you could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate that, Kyle. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Okay, Charlie, go ahead.
Hey, Kyle, real quick. And so we're talking about business days or calendar days?
Everything is calendar
after
days.
Acceptance?
Everything is calendar days. The only thing is business days is the deposit. So everything else is calendar days. The only time that a
calendar
weekend
includes
or
the weekends?
Yes. The only time that a weekend or a holiday don't count is if the performance date lands on it. So if day 17 falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or holiday, it moves to the next business day. That's the only thing. But those holidays and weekends count as days. So if I got an offer accepted, like last week, right, we had President's Day, right, which was a federal holiday, but we got an offer accepted on Friday. Saturday was day 1, Sunday was day 2, President's Day was day 3, right? It counted for day 3. If that had been a performance date, it wouldn't have counted. So that's how that works. We're going to talk about those days later on. All right, let's keep moving. The preliminary title report. I got 17 days to review it. Again, order that prelim as soon as possible. Get it over to the buyers so that they can review it. And I'm going to say something right now. Both of you, as buyer and listing agent, need to review the prelim. You need to be able to read a prelim, look at a prelim, look for red flags, and ask questions. If neither party is looking at it, then we end up with problems, right? So for an example, if I'm a listing agent, the first thing I do to get the prelim is I'm going to look at it and make sure that the liens and everything that's on there are true, are correct. I'm going to go to my seller and say, okay, this is everything that's on here. Especially if my seller tells me they owe something, like when we did our net sheet, oh, I owe X amount or whatever it is. And then you get their prelim and it's more that they owe. If I'm a buyer's agent and I look at all the liens and encumbrances that show up on the prelim and it exceeds the sales price that we wrote for the offer, I'm going to call and ask a question and be like, hey, is this a short sale? You guys have to be proactive in that way, because there's so many times where people don't review the prelim, and then we get towards the end of escrow and we find out that the sellers aren't making as much money as they thought, or now it's a short sale and they want to cancel. They don't have the right to cancel. So now it becomes the listing agent's problem for not reviewing it. So if you're, again, I know that some of you put the stuff off on the TCs, and the TCs are good enough to review it with the sellers, but that's not their job. It's yours. Please, 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 I'm imploring you to start reviewing your prelims. Yes, Giovanni.
So I know there's some situations where, let's say, for example, there's like tax delinquencies or any liens on the property, and let's say it's not really a lot, maybe it's 1,000 or 2,000, and it's getting close to closing, but we don't know that info because we still needed, like, I don't know, information, and we barely find out maybe at the end of escrow. At that point, if the seller's like sad or mad that they have to pay that and they don't want to pay it, I mean, they technically can't cancel.
No, they cannot cancel.
Gotcha. Because I know there's like preliminary numbers in the beginning of escrow, and then there's like final net sheet numbers. So if they're not happy with the final net sheet numbers, what happens then?
Too bad. Look, here's the thing, and this is why we're talking about reviewing the prelim. All of those things are on there. If you see them at the very beginning, when you get your prelim, if you guys would review it with them and they say, wait a minute, we paid that off. No, that's paid. Oh, wait, that should be less than that. If you review that stuff with them, there is no surprise at the end. Because if they say, oh, that's not correct, and we need a payoff for this one, or I paid that one off, then you have time to work on it from the beginning. But the problem is that agents don't care. They don't look at the prelim. Oh, escrow will do that. Oh, so-and-so will do. Oh, title's going to take care of it. No, that's your job. Plain and simple. We got to stop being lazy as agents. You guys get paid a lot of money, and the reason you get paid a lot of money is to protect your clients and help guide them through this transaction. And if you're ignoring a prelim and you don't review it and you've never reviewed it, then you're not doing your job. Period. End of story. I'm sorry. That's how I feel. You guys have to start doing it. And it's one of the things that I know for a fact 99% of the agents don't do it. I know it. So you've got to learn how to read a prelim. If you don't know how to read a prelim, call your title rep and say, hey, can you sit with me for about 30 minutes and show me what I should be looking for on a prelim? That's all you're going to need. Promise you. I promise you. But you guys got to start doing it. Okay? Someone just put, I'd love to take another class on how to read the prelim. Yeah, sure, that's great. But you could also call your rep, and I bet you they could spend 15 minutes with you and tell you exactly how to read the prelim. Promise you. As long as you guys keep using the same title rep, you don't keep jumping around and use, I got to give a title to this guy tomorrow and this one next time. No. Call the person that you're loyal to, ask them to help you, and they're going to show you. Okay? All right. Moving on. Common interest disclosures, that's the like condos, townhouses, right? That's that stuff. Again, you got to make sure you get those ordered right away. And I know if escrow orders them, they wait until the deposit's in. So sometimes those are going to be delayed. You have to prepare for that delay. Review or release or liened items. That's like solar panels, Pacer Hero liens, those kind of things. The buyer has a period of time to review those leases and decide whether or not they want to take them on. And that is a contingency of the offer now. If they don't want to take on that lease for your solar panels or the payment for the lien for the Pacer Hero programs that you've done with the property, they're not required to. They have time to do it. They have 17 days. If they remove their contingency of that, they accept it, then you're good. Okay. Sale of buyer's property. So now this is contingent on the buyer selling their home. And if that box is checked, right? If that box is checked, then what should be attached is the COP. Not from transaction. What am I doing? I got to go here. And I go here and I get the COP and I put it in. Where is it? I don't know why it's not showing up on here for me. Oh, here, let's do it this way. Here we go. All right, so now I'm going to add that one to my transaction so we could look at it. So here's the contingency for sale of buyer's property. Not going to spend a lot of time with it. We'll do that in a separate class, but I want you guys to see this form is going to be added to your transaction, right, when you're contingent. So if I'm contingent, I got to fill that out. I got to make sure it's enclosed. If I am a listing agent and I get an offer where that box is checked, I went too far. Where am I? Here we go. If I get an offer where this box is checked, but I don't receive the COP, then I'm going to counter them with the COP that benefits my seller. Okay? So just keep your eyes open for that. You got to see that if that's checked and you don't get it, you have to be proactive as listing agent, okay? All right. Anybody have any questions about the contingencies before we move on? Anybody? No? All right. All right. Time of possession. So in this new contract, right, the one that's, 2 years old or 3 years old, whenever, I think it's 2021 it changed, I'm not sure. They separated the seller occupancy and the possession. They separated them into two separate things. So by default, it says that I am the owner, like the buyer is the owner of the property upon confirmation of recordation. You see that right there? So once it records, I'm the owner. Now, whether the seller is going to remain in possession are two separate things. I'm the owner at this time, but the seller may be remaining in possession, which is a second section here that we have to fill out. So, for example, if the seller is going to remain in possession for anything more than 1 day, right? It could be 1 day after close of escrow. I need to incorporate the SIP. So anything from 1 to 29, I'm going to include this form, the SIP. Okay? And we could look at that in a moment. If it is anything that is more than, if it is 30 plus, 30 or more days, I'm going to include the RLAS, which is the residential lease after sale. Okay. So, for you as buyer's agents, I would leave this alone, this recordation. You don't need to change any of this stuff, okay? Unless it's a tenant-occupied property and you can deal with that. But leave it alone. The default for time of possession, done. But seller-occupied or vacant, close of escrow date, or if checked below, this is where we're going to put it in. Now, if I have a seller that is in possession of the property, and I still can't believe to this day, I still see you guys allow this to happen. If I'm a listing agent, my seller lives in the property, even if it's a non-contingent sale, there is no way that I am giving them anything less than 3 days after close of escrow. No way. They're going to get 3 days after close of escrow at a minimum. At a minimum. If it is a contingent sale, right, where I have to find a replacement property and close concurrently, I'm telling you guys it should be 10 days after close of escrow because I has to close. I have to be able to transfer the funds. They may need time after close on my upleg. I'm going to ask for this. Just as a default, guys, if I'm doing a sale, a contingent sale where the seller's finding a replacement property, I'm writing 10 days all the time. Now, if I'm a buyer's agent, I'm going to do it like this because I want my offer to be strong. So I'm going to say to them, yeah, I'm giving you guys the 10 days for free because it's contingent, or I'm giving you guys the 3 days for free because you live in the property. Okay. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, sellers are not out of the property on the date of close of escrow. 99.9% of the time. Does it happen? Yes. But the majority of sales, there's always the seller is staying after. And I can't tell you how many times we've had conversations where, you know, a buyer wrote an offer and didn't give the 3 days. The listing agent didn't counter to ask for the 3 days. The seller needs the 3 days to move out. And we're dealing with a buyer who's pissed that they need to move out, a seller who's pissed that now they're being asked for money, and it all becomes the listing agent's fault for not protecting his client. So for all of you guys, as a default, if I have a seller in possession of a property that I'm selling, I am always going to counter a minimum of 3 days. Yes, Charlie, go ahead.
Hey Kyle, I know in a previous session you talked about the per diem for the seller. Where does that fall into this? Where you charge money, I think, per day or something?
Well, let's go to the seller license to remain in possession. Okay, so if we add that to the form, we look at it. Okay, so I got to do this. This is for 29 days or less. So whatever we agree to, whether it's the 3 days or the 10 days, let's use 3 for example. I'm going to write 3 days. They're going to stay there 3 days after close of escrow. Okay. Here, this one lets you type in zeros. This one does not. As you can see, if I type out of it, it disappears. So you're going to have to handwrite in anything like that. This is a delivery of possession fee, and I would leave something behind, or I would request it if I was doing this as buyer's agent and including it in my offer. Okay. This is money that gets held in escrow. Let's say it's $5,000. Okay. Held in escrow. So that way, when the seller does move out, they get that money back. It's just an incentive for the move out. The buyer doesn't get it. The buyer can't ever get it. It just says if the delivery of possession to buyer, if they're not on time, this money gets held. Once they're on time, here's the money, you get it back. Okay. Then what Charlie was talking about is a per diem, right? Now, if you want to charge for the 3 days, that would go here. Let's say it's $100 per day, right? I could put that if I wanted to charge for those 3 days. Generally, that is not common. Those 3 days are generally free. Okay. But I could if I wanted to charge there. But if I want to say as seller, if I have to remain in possession, seller remains in possession beyond day 3 after close of escrow, seller to pay $100 per diem for hold over. Okay, that's it. I'm including that as listing agent. I want to include it, and this is why I want to include it. If I stay day 4 or 5 because of whatever happens, it's going to cost me a couple $100 for remaining in possession. If I don't have this per diem in place and I stay a couple extra days, if the buyer can prove that they were damaged in any way, they could go after me for that total amount of damages. In this case, I'm protected to only costing me $200 if I stay. That's where the per diem goes. That's how that works. And I think everybody should have that built in. Exactly. So I hope that helped, Charlie. Gio, you had your hand up.
Yeah. So was that the previous RPA that automatically gave the seller three days?
No RPA gave. It's never been automatic. It's always been something you have to put in.
Yeah, it used to say.
No, it never did. I promise you, it never did.
So the seller always has to give possession to the buyer as soon as they close escrow?
That's the default, yes.
That's the default?
Unless you put the time in. The default is you're out on the date of close of escrow. That's it.
I could have sworn the default used to be 3 days.
No, Gio.
No?
Never been.
Wow.
All right. So it is 11:55. I think that will stop there. No, you know what? Let's do this. If the property is tenant occupied, whether the tenant is staying or leaving, you're required to have the TOPA as part of your offer. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it's a single family or it's 4 units. You have to include the TOPA if there's a tenant in, whether the tenant is moving out or the tenant is remaining in possession after your sale. You have to put it in. So you can put in there, the property is going to be delivered vacant if it's a single family, and they're going to do that and they have the ability to do that, or if 1 or the 2 of the units are going to be delivered vacant, or if the tenant's going to remain in possession, that's the default. But this is where we get to dictate, like we're asking for the tenant estoppels, all of those things. This has a different approach. If the buyer, let's say that the tenant is now acting as the buyer, then you would put this in the TOPA. So you've got to include it. You have to include it. I don't know how many times on tenant occupied properties we are not seeing the TOPA included from the beginning, and it needs to be. Okay, so you guys have to make sure that you're including this form with your purchase agreement if there's tenants in possession. If the tenants are moving out or if the tenants are staying, you've got to have this as part of your transaction. Okay. All right. So, yes, Gio, go ahead.
Kyle, I never thought this day would come. I looked at the old RPA, and it does say 3 days. So what it says is, buyer or seller give the other property at least 3 days after delivery to close escrow. It says close of escrow, and then it says may not be delivered any earlier than 3 days prior to the close of escrow.
Email me what you're looking at.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Yeah. I think you're looking at something else, but go ahead and send it to me. That's fine.
Come on, bro. Have faith in me, bro. Come on.
Gio, this is a recording, so I'm going to be really nice to you because this is going to be on YouTube. But I don't know if I miss you being on this class or not. I don't think I'd rather answer your questions in private. Okay. So any questions before we finish?
Kyle, I have a
Yes.
quick question regarding the session.
Yes.
So it says the session to be once property is recorded, right? There used to be that we could put a time on there.
You still can.
We don't
it's
have
still
to
there.
anymore?
You don't have to. It's just the default is now when it's recorded. But you could put if you rather it be 6 o'clock on that day. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kyle.
But you can change the time and the date if you want, but you don't need to, because only if the seller is going to remain in possession, then we're dealing with it on that next section of the contract.
Okay, only because sometimes sellers were like, "Oh, we still need to get a few items out, but you can have keys today," and they don't really want to.
But I don't know what happened. My camera went out of focus. I would never, if the seller still is going to have stuff after the close of escrow, then you do the SIP. Because even if they're giving them the keys, they still have. Why would I give you the keys if I still need to get into the house to get my stuff out? No. When they're out, they're out. That's when they're going to give the keys to the buyer.
The buyer. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
All
Kyle.
right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, guys. All right. So if you missed any part of this, you want to see it later, you want to review it, it'll be on YouTube probably in, I don't know, about an hour or so. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it, and I will talk to you soon.